Let's come back to our exploring of the ancient alive, not in the present, but in the presence. When you exhume present out of a time form, you get a continuum. There is no present. And what distributes throughout that time form's energy is presence. The closest angel in heaven to God is the angel of the presence. We have come to understand that that's a shared presence, and that angel is distributable to all ever. This is a painting done on Hollywood Boulevard over many years by an African American named Joseph. And Joseph was the head book buyer for Book City, a huge used bookstore. They had a branch in North Hollywood as well, in the San Fernando Valley. But the Hollywood Boulevard Book City was the used bookstore on the scale that the original great Pickwick was for new books. And Joseph was the head book buyer for a whole generation of used books on every conceivable subject in the world and beyond. On Hollywood Boulevard, you had to cover a lot of beyond, along with the world in all of its kaleidoscope. The title of this painting is Gabriel's High C. For the end of a time form and the beginning of a time form, Gabriel, from heaven to us direct, blows his trumpet. He blows not a note, but he blows a jazz riff that you can only hear if you can hear jazz that takes blues and puts it into a new rhythm. And that new rhythm in blues ain't rock and roll. It's soul music. It's that quality that you find in the wonderful black American music, that the lyrics roll in a new way. And one of the great protagonists of that was Chuck Berry. One of the most popular of his songs with the Beatles was Johnny Be Good. He can play a guitar just like a ringing a bell. Go, go, Johnny, go. But for those of us who were alert kaleidoscopically in the 1950s, his song Roll Over Beethoven, Tell Tchaikovsky the News, they're rocking in 2 by 2. You reel and bop and move it over, and it's that quality that is there in Joseph's life. He was the only person on Hollywood Boulevard who understood the mad goddess of complexity, his girlfriend, who went by the ancient Egyptian name of Nefertiti. There wasn't anyone who knew her real name. And she was the reincarnation of Nefertiti. And she insisted that Joseph was really that figure who was anciently the quality of her mate, and that all he had to do was to recognize his great archetypal significance. She was disturbed when he gave me the painting of Gabriel's high C. I ran a bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard from 1976 through 1981, and then went back to full-time being a teacher of wisdom. Will Alexander is one of those great figures for whom he understands the ancient archetypal origins, but understands that they are coursing through presence into a kaleidoscopic future. The very title, kaleidoscopic omniscience. The very sense of a vertical rainbow climber. The quality in this slender volume, exobiology as goddess, with one of his paintings as a cover. Mid-poetic. No. And I am not speaking for the quest for dialectical frondage, but movement which sweeps across a narrow wall of flux, across foundational pathology, yet spinning above a garish vulture's milk. One thinks of fevers, of drawls, of quiescence, of burnings. Then the nerves, the chants, the quaking motor flows. My hearing focused upon songs about thirstless cranial doves, about the listless erasers of panic, like a tragic mystical salt within an incandescent bravery. And such bravery is the color of rhizomes and multiples, much like a splintered nebula is food. Her phonation flies throughout the high refractive index of diamonds, with their separate flares, with their special carbon ideals, become the motion in which sound floats, wafting above molten flowing in Minas Gerais. This, by the way, is not Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, but this is an area in Brazil where all the great crystals come from. My lovely wife, Nisa, has a lot of experience in Brazil and has a great sense of crystals and that whole appreciation that there are special areas on the earth, not just for gold and silver and platinum, but for the jewels of nature, the crystals. Joseph's painting of Gabriel's high C is a crystal that has its facets cut by not just years, but whole generations of remembrance and insight going back before civilization, before culture became Homo sapiens sapiens. We were a species that was largely African. Joseph's gray beard and demeanor and everything was timeless, in the sense that he could size a book up out of boxes and boxes of books and right away affix a price to it and have it carted off and put on a shelf, and did this for a generation. Hundreds of thousands of books. Had that ability. Could hear Gabriel's high C because something was ending. It's all over. And something was seething to emerge like a volcanic sap coming out to be put into a distillation so its various sugars would give something like the sap from a maple tree being able to put into all kinds of forms, from pancakes to little candies to just the sense that one now could have something that had the tone that hadn't been seen before. About the time that Césaire passed away in 2008, a whole bundle of ingenuity and talent was happening at the University of Texas Press, which had published a volume in the year 2000, the millennium, the aeon. Betty DeJong Medor, her book Inanna, Lady of Largest Heart, about Inanna, the most primordial goddess in world literature that established world literature, literally, not just figuratively, by Enheduanna, the head priestess of the temple of Nana in Kishgalgal, in Ur, and around 2300 BC, she was able to write the literary holding of the mythology of Inanna, the great goddess, the exobiology of, not just of, but as goddess, and to live that life and to reach out to all of the various city-states with their temples in Sumeria, and that southern part of Mesopotamia, spread out along the Euphrates into the Persian Gulf, into the Tigris, and to be able to put into a poetic each of the gods and goddesses, the divinities of that temple, of that city, and to do this again and again until she had made a necklace of jewels, of poetic jewels, known as the temple hymns, that takes the light of Inanna, the exobiology of the goddess. She's bringing into play something which was there that lit the moon in all of its phases, that whole lunar cycle, that, yes, this is how it is, and is related to the sun with its diurnal being thus and so. Yes, it can be obscured by clouds. It's the clouds obscuring, not the sun going out or dampening. And so the moon and the sun, the publishing house of Asia and Haiti, in fact, is Sun and Moon Press in Los Angeles. One sees in all the Tibetan tankas the sun and the moon in the upper angles. And this quality of Betty DeJong Medor in this epical book of 2000, University of Texas Press, followed it up in 2009 just months after. In fact, it was being printed when Caesar passed away in April. His birthday was in June. He would have been 95 years old. She translates the temple hymns. The quality that is exceptional in this is how she begins. The first temple hymn, even though she is the high priestess at Ur, enormously talented, having the background and the backing of her father, Sargon of Akkad, who founded the entire dynasty, who took the power out of the millennial hands of the Sumerians and put it into a North Semitic reforming, recalibration of Akkadian. Its location still has never been exactly found. Many things are still hidden, soon to come out. Not quite yet. The first to found what we would today call a grand world-scale international empire stretching from the Cyprus island in the Mediterranean to the Indus River watershed in India 4,400 years ago. 4,400 years ago. 4,000 years before Shakespeare was established. She did not choose Ur, where she was the high priestess. She chose the most ancient city of Samaria, where it began to have a god mythology centered on a temple area, which then would be next to the palace, and that the link of palace and temple together is that kind of primordial barbell by which the exercise of empire is maintained and kept. She went to the temple of Enki at Eridu. Translated by Betty DeJong Medor. Just a few lines. Before any Duana could fix the order of her collection of temple hymns, she had to make a decision which one to begin with. And she has this quality which comes through. Abzu, your hymns praise creation's elements, your grand surrounding wall unequaled, and the chamber where the God lives, whose dining hall lets no light enter truly from wall to wall. Your firm anchored house has a purity beyond measure. O crowned Eridu, shining crown, sworn by your prince, the great prince, the Sabu priest makes the pure plants grow. Where your watery home hits the great below, and voices pour out to Utu, revered shrine stretching towards heaven. They carry bread from the oven to eat, the oven brimming over, rivals the holy chamber. Words of your prince, Prince of heaven and earth, cannot be altered. The Creator, the Wise One, decreed. Lord Nudimud, the blood maker, O Enger, has built this house on your radiant site and placed his seat upon your dais. Bread and blood, bread and wine. 4,300 years ago in a North Semitic Akkadian language, still written in cuneiform, but to be the textbook for writing in cuneiform for the next 1,000 years. She was the Homer before there was a Homer. Homer, who was a contemporary of King David, who was the first to write an elegant, poetic Hebrew, the Psalms. And Homer, the first to write an elegant, written Greek. Not only the Iliad and the Odyssey, but the Homeric hymns. Hymns to Hermes, to Apollo, and so forth. They're contemporaries. They're millennial, in between two great ages, like a pivot. One, that great age that some 400 years after Enneaduana came a visionary in Ur, a young man named Abram, who later, after visionary, transformed in carrying out a journey, a pilgrimage to somewhere new, a promised land that the vision delivered. He became Abraham, born about 2000 BC. Almost all of the dating that one finds is wrong. Unless you know the rhythm of the time forms, civilization does not ring like a bell. The language of a poetic falls into a dissonant quality that one can get used to, but a real harmonic has a penetration into the invisible, where there is no allegorical limit any longer. And reality is more astounding than any surreality could chaotically attempt. This quality comes into play in our time. One of the wonderful developments about the time that Meador was doing her Enneaduana, humming the blues inspired by Enneaduana's songs to Inanna, published in Oregon. She has a very interesting take. The first lines of the first little blues poetic, sister. Sometimes I think I ought to call you the queen of the May, the way you toss light like yellow dandelions out of a basket here and there, or maybe I should call you God, the way you've wrapped the laws of heaven and earth around your waist, like a belt, the way you skim over chaos like a quicksilver river. But I call you sister, because you're like the rest of us, opening like a pale morning, swelling like a storm, clutching the torch of longing to your breast until you feel life at your throat, until you're all dressed up in flames. Sweet sister, you know it all. A woman's desire is deep, and you're the measure of it. Cass Douglas. There are qualities of the emergence of Inanna. Here's a cover with Inanna in her flowing dress and the royal line of Sargon standing with his oblation to her and her dance of reality. It is a quality that is emerging because one has, for the first time, an understanding that the last generation, the last 20, 25 years, has seen a surging of resonance in a large scalar harmonic around figures that were for a long time understood by just a handful. So few that even saying esoteric would be billboarding it. Up until about 25 years ago, you could count on your fingers the books on Ibn Arabi, the greatest Islamic poetic seer of all time. There have been about 50 books published on, or translations of various works of his in the last 25 years. A surge of any Diwana studies, not just princess, priestess, poet, but the whole realization that there is a new past, that presence makes a continuum with the future when we are sharing the presence. That the present moment is the archetypal form of lying about time, about the fact that it is a first dimension, that it brings dimensions into play, and that that play is part of the dance of the real. This is a quality that is stifled, and when it becomes stifled, it becomes a real threat to the recently acquired empire, the world empire. Just like now, a new world order is threatened because its so-called sourcing money, power, military, aliens even, all of this is brought not only into question, not only into doubt, but being evaporated into irrelevance quickly. Like the sun rising evaporates the dew and brings the new day. In those situations, there is always some seer who has been given a feminine wisdom in a masculine tone of exploration, so that there is an incredible balance going on, whose language then has a particular kind of poetic flow of presence, because it came by being raised, refined again and again by a shared presencing. And in the last time form major node, I call them carrier waves. The figure who said the end has come in the grandest way. At the time, that grand way was called apocalypse. St. John in Ephesus, having been born to a mother named Salome, who was the oldest sister of Jesus, who was raised by his older brother James, about 10 years older, until he was 12. And at the Last Supper, it was nephew to uncle young John to Jesus, am I the betrayer you're fingering out now? Lay his head on his chest, because he was a beloved nephew, was special. Having been raised by not only the mother Salome, born in Alexandria, where the family was at the time, with the infant Jesus until he was 5. St. John grew to be a massive threat to the new power maturation of the Roman emperors who had replaced the Caesars. They're so clever and so powerful, the Flavians. And the founder Vespasian had 2 sons, and the older son, Titus, was the one in charge of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the city of David. David's palatial, just below the temple. Then again, that barbell of complexity. The younger son's name was Domitian, and he made sure to poison the older brother, Titus, who only reigned for 2 years, because his lady fair was Jewish. Domitian took umbrage against the tutor of St. John, who was Mary Magdalene, and he built a temple to himself in Ephesus, right next to the ancient center of the whole cult of Artemis and her long, 900-foot-long temple in Ephesus. And this is the face on the colossal statue of Domitian in Ephesus, meant to silence forever the influence of St. John and his tutor and the whole development. And this is the arm, only the head and the arm of Domitian survive. The arm is over 6 feet tall. He exiled St. John to the rocky island of Patmos off the coast of Asia Minor, thinking he was unable to bring death to St. John in Rome, and it's there on Patmos, that final death in life, exile, that he wrote the Apocalypse. But at the same time that he was writing the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation, the fruition of that Greek language that he had pioneered, along with another confrere named Apollos in Alexandria, together for about 12 years after they laid Mary Magdalene to rest. They don't say she died. The Greek word is komesis. That whole quality was brought back into light in the late 190s, early 200s AD by a genius woman named Julia Domna, who married an African Roman emperor, Septimius Severus. He was masterful at being able to be complexly victorious in the kind of plotting that it took in Rome, but he had the African insight that all of this was a game of masks and that he was never confusing himself with the actuality that needed to be done, and so he was a very effective ruler, and his home city of Leptis Magna was so disregarded that it became a Roman equivalent with the Egyptian Amarna. Akhenaten, the husband of Nefertiti, and their whole center was forgotten, so was Leptis Magna. The way in which the sculptural frieze shows Julia Domna, she's holding up the caduceus, because she, in Septimius Severus, this is her in detail, co-opted all of the wisdom literature of the Middle East, from Alexandria into Palestine, into everywhere that the Roman Empire could, and they took all the books and destroyed all the copies, so that wisdom was severely truncated and left in the hands of just a few. And when we start next week in 2015, we will take that present and evaporate the present as a now that divides future and past, where our presence restores the continuity of the future and the new past, a symmetry that resonates into a harmonic. More than. Bye.